Sped 2010 students. I am making this video to show you what you're going to be doing this week. So the first thing I wanted to touch on is you will be completing your first test, your first quiz. So we have 3 modules in this class. So if we go to course information and hit content, you're going to see you have the first module was getting started and familiarizing yourself with the course. But then we have 3 other modules. Now those modules, as I mentioned before, are actually our learning content modules. So we just now finished up week 5 in module 2. So you have 5 weeks of content and then you will have a quiz or exam. So it's time for you to take your exam over module 2. So going back and recapping, week 1, we literally dove into special education and the foundations of it. So we started looking at people's first. Then in week 2, we talked about the history of special education. 3, we talked really about the laws, IDA and Section 504. Week 4 was all about family engagement and collaborating with families of children with special needs. And then lastly, last week, we talked about the disability categories in special education evaluation and eligibility. That is what you're going to be tested over. So like I said, go to assessments, select quizzes, and then you will see quiz 1. Do not begin the quiz until you are ready. You do have a whole week. Okay, so you have starting now until Sunday at 11:59 is when the quiz closes. Please be prepared. I emailed everyone the quiz review study guide. Please look at that. Please look at all your notes. I know it is open book and open notes because you're doing it on your own time at home, but please still study because, as I told you before, you don't want to, it is a timed test and I don't want you to spend all your time trying to look through your textbook and PowerPoints and waste all your time. It's easier if you have everything there and you're studying and you have outlines and you have your study guide, and that's really going to help you. That is what you'll have to do this week. I know that you're going to be studying for the quiz, but we still have to move on into module 3. Okay, so you'll do the quiz, and then this week we'll also be getting into week 6, which is module 3. So for week 6, you're really going to be looking at IEPs. Okay, now IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. So we're really going to look at the educational framework, the pre-referral process, the RTI intervention, and mostly IEPs. You will have sample IEPs that you're going to be looking at this week. You will have activity to do this week. So as far as your learning activities, you will be reading chapters 2, 3, and 4 in your textbook, which is the digital version, A Teacher's Guide to Special Education. I also want you to look at 1.2 and all of Component 2 in Tennessee's Special Education Framework. You're going to read the article. Okay, so just to preface, this is a week for you to do another RAD. Remember, you have a choice of what weeks you want to do the other 3. So I know several of you have already completed 2, which is perfect. You just have 2 left to do, but you just choose, which ones you want to do. But this is a chance for you to do a RAD if you choose. It's going to be over RTI, Response to Intervention. Now this specifically relates to children with disabilities. So you have that link here as far as what you're going to read, and then you also have the actual link to the discussion board itself. Now your assignments, you're going to have 2 IRIS modules. It's really 1, but they broke it up into 2 parts, but it's just basically the same thing. It's 1 IRIS module. And then you will have some note sheets. Okay, I also have an IEP team process video that you're going to watch as well. That's really helpful. How am I going to assess? Well, if you choose to do a RAD this week, you'll be assessed on that. Then you also will submit one of the note sheets for IEP as well. to the Dropbox. So when we're looking at what our key concepts are this week, we're going to be looking at what an IEP, what is it? So I have a link here for you that defines what an IEP is. It stands for Individualized Education Plan. We're also going to be talking about and learning about this week what an RTI is and how does that relate to children who are being evaluated or have special needs. So RTI stands for Response to Intervention. Okay, so I have a really neat website here for you. It's called A Tiered Approach to Instructing All Students. Within doing RTI, you're going to hear a lot of talk or read a lot about differentiating instruction. So you're going to learn what that is. You're going to learn Universal Design for Learning, which is another approach that has to do with response to intervention. And then what does present levels of performance mean? Now this is going to be something that's listed inside of an IEP. You will get to see IEPs, and I'll show you where to find those because you will be looking at IEPs this week as well. So that's our overview of week 6. So now let's get into kind of the content. So reading from the textbook, I put here what I wanted you to read. I also wanted you to read a couple of pages in Exceptional Learners, just 2. This is really going to talk about what our overview was. So if you turn to page 24 in your textbook, it's going to go into RTI. So this is just going to help you engage a little more into RTI in the different tiers, the 3 tiers that we have. So there's a couple of pages there for you to read. And then, of course, as I mentioned in the overview, you're going to be reading chapters 2, 3, and 4 in the Teacher's Guide to Special Education. Now remember, this is the book I gave you to look at. It's a wonderful resource, so just make sure you click on it and it should take you to the book itself. Now, I do have a Nearpod presentation lesson. This Nearpod I created because I felt like it would be better to do this than to just give you the PowerPoint and not really let you engage with feedback, right? So giving you questions, discussion questions to think about, letting you think about the content and how to relate to it a little bit better. So the Nearpod lesson, when you click on it, you can do it 2 ways. You can click on it and get into it. So I prepared Nearpod lesson for you in week 4. I have prepared several Nearpod quiz reviews for you as well. So you should be able to get in it just like you did the others. So you could either click on the link or you can join by typing in join.nearpod.com and then you'll put this class code in it. And that should allow you to get into the Nearpod. Please let me know if you have any questions about that. Okay, so that video I talked about, this is a really useful video. For sake of time, I'm not going to sit here and click and open the link up, but please watch that video because it discusses what the process of IEP team is and what do they do. There's a transcription for it. If you are read write, that's perfect for you. Then I have some resources here for you. I have the Tennessee Special Education Framework, which you're going to be reading out of. There's the book I talked about that you need to read chapters out of. And then these are really just extra resources for you. The Misunderstood Minds, which are really wonderful resource. So when you click on it, it just talks about different students who may have different problems like learning disabilities and attention, reading, writing, and math. So if you click on them, you can also click on stories from different children. This is a wonderful resource for you. Then I have another one that really talks specifically about IEPs, which is where a large base or a large portion of our content is this week. So when you click on it, it's just a web page that's going to really talk about if your child's IEP goals are SMART. Okay, now SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable results. Are they oriented and they're time bound, which means they have a time limit. Okay, so this is just going to help you get the most out of the IEP and the child receiving services. Okay, so just make sure you look at that because this goes over some of the stuff we're going to be learning about this week. Okay, I went ahead and put here a presentation for you. Remember, I do want you for sure to look at that Nearpod presentation. That's a bulk of our content this week. But this really is a great resource for you because it's really going to dive more into the evaluation process if students are eligible for special ed services. Do they qualify for special education services? So if you remember, this looks a little familiar. This looks a little bit like what we were talking about in week 5. So I feel like it's going to go back and let you make connections. But something else it's going to do, it's really going to let you see what the process is for students to receive special education services. So what's the process when we're trying to evaluate these students and assess them to see if they qualify for those special ed services? So remember, to qualify special ed services, students have to fall under these disability categories. There's 14 that IDEA recognizes, right? Remember, we talked last week, the State Department of Education for Tennessee recognizes 16. We have the 14 here. So really, when we're thinking about RTI and we're evaluating them under IDEA, we have to think about if they're eligible, which means do they fall under one of those categories for IDEA, and does their disability does it adversely impact their education? Okay, so those two things are really going to help determine if they're going to qualify for services. So there's a process that you have to go through when you're trying to evaluate students, right? We have to look at these 6 steps. This is what we call the framework component. So these are the steps in which you, if a child is referred to be tested or assessed for eligibility for special ed, these are the steps you take. The first thing you look at is screening. Okay, so screening, I'm talking about those universal district tests that they have by grade level. Sometimes it could even include state tests, right? This is the benchmark, the things that we look at to measure students in a group. So that's usually a grade level. Then you look at pre-referral interventions. Then we look at monitoring progress for that student. We look at referrals, we look at evaluation, and we look at determining eligibility. The reason that we have these steps in place, this framework, if you will, is because we want to eliminate the need to put all students in special ed. Not all students need services for special education. Some of them might just need modifications. Maybe they just need you to differentiate your lesson plans. So these are things that you have to think about, but this is why those steps are put in place. So the first step is screening, right? We're really looking at screening all students. So when we talk about those district tests, the district test they give them is based on skills, right? And normally these are given 2 to 3 times a year. So I know in the district I worked at when I was teaching elementary and early childhood, they did district tests twice a year. So they called it a DIBELS test. So this really screened them for reading and math. Mostly we concentrated on reading. And we gave it to them at the start of the school year, and then we gave it to them toward the end in the springtime. And what this did, it really let us gauge to see is that benchmark that we need to measure them against their peers and where they should be on grade level or not. So that's the first thing that you do. The second part of the framework is really that pre-referral process. So a lot of times you'll see this, that general ed teacher is the first person to notice that the student's having difficulties, something's not right. So this pre-referral process here on step 2 is really designed so we can prevent requiring special ed testing in the first place. So this is why this was put in place. There is a series of steps that are designed to prevent students from requiring special education. They do this on purpose. So we have to make sure that we look at the interventions, we look at all the data we've gathered, we determine if that student has a disability, if it's adversely affecting or impacting their education. So these are things that a team has to look at when we're considering a student for special education. Then we look at the pre-referral interventions and what that actually means. So the pre-referral intervention process really is how we identify students. How do we develop and implement alternative strategies for that students to help them with those gaps they have or those deficits, if you will. Then we look at, okay, well, who is the referral intervention team? Well, this could be, of course, you, whether you're a special education teacher or a general education. It could include the parents and the guardians, the administrator, the nurse, the guidance counselor, or any other person that's involved as a caregiver. Then we look at specific learning disabilities. Now, this was a lot of our content in week 5, right? So we talked about what a specific learning disability meant. So I'm not going to go over that because we went over this a lot in Chapter 5 content, but we have to look at the category of disability. Then we're going to do RTI, response to intervention. This is basically what we were talking about a couple slides ago. This was put in place so we can make sure that we are doing everything we can, and it's to address the needs of all students, because some students may just need intervention, they don't need special ed services. So that's why this was designed. So this is basically research-based, high-quality instructions that it's tiered with intervention strategies to meet the needs of students. When you do RTI, you are always monitoring their students' progress. You're looking at your decisions you're making when you're preparing lessons. You're looking at the student and how they're progressing. And you're making sure you're collecting all that data you need so that way you can move them throughout the intervention tiers and look at the curriculum. Where should you place the student? So there is a video here that talks about response to intervention and what it is. It kind of gives you a definition, an opening, if you will, so you can watch that if you'd like. Now, if you're a visual person, this model is really going to help you visually see what we're talking about. When we're talking about RTI, response to intervention, we look at 3 tiers, okay? The first tier is all. So this is basically your general curriculum. This is what all students have to get, right, to meet those standards that you have set forth you, that your students have to learn these standards. So about 80 to 85% of all students are going to be in Tier 1. So everybody gets Tier 1 regardless. But then you have some students who struggle and they can't get it in your regular instruction to the whole class. So what you'll have to do is you'll provide them with some additional intervention strategies. So they will be in Tier 2. So this is going to be about 10 to 15%. So in addition to the Tier 1, which everybody gets, they're going to also get some extra stuff. So they're going to be looking at interventions that are research-based that's going to help that student with that deficit that they have. What are those skills they need help with? A lot of times this means you're going to pull that student out in a small group, probably 4 to 6 students. You're going to work on those skills with the students using research-based strategies that help them. The third tier is a little bit more intensive. So this is the most intensive tier intervention that you provide. So not only are they getting Tier 1, but they're also going to be in Tier 3. So this means that you have about 3 to 5 students here. When you do Tier 3 intervention, they're going to get double the time that the Tier 1 would get. So this just means in addition to regular instruction, which is Tier 1, you will pull them aside. Now, when you do this, normally rules are you shouldn't do more than 1 to 2 students because it has to be intensive, research-based instruction strategies for that student, right? A lot of times your teacher aide will help you with this, or the special ed teacher themselves will help you. Okay, so when we're looking at the Tennessee specific learning disabilities definition, this is how they defined it. Okay, so they define it as an underachievement in one of these skills, one of these subject areas. Plus you have RTI, and then you have to look at these exclusionary factors, okay, such as do they have any kind of disability, right? We have to look at the environment, at home and at school. Are they disadvantaged? We have to look at if they're English language learner. We have to look at if they're economically disadvantaged. We have to look at their intellectual disability. Is there some kind of emotional disturbance going on? Do they have an impairment like vision, hearing, or motor disability? So these are the 3 conditions that we look at when we're talking about specific learning disabilities. Okay, so specific learning disabilities always have some kind of deficit. Okay, so you can have a specific learning disability in lots of areas: basic reading skills, fluency, reading comprehension, written expression, mathematics, calculation, or mathematics problem solving. So the third step in RTI is really to monitor progress. So once the student is in their intervention, you have to monitor to see if these research-based strategies are working. So you monitor them. Data is going to be collected. You, the teacher of the classroom, is responsible for this. A team can support you, but you will mostly do the data and collecting the data and monitor their progress. So usually they use what we call curriculum-based measurement, and this is just an effective way that's really fast to quickly monitor and assess them and see if they're making progress. So here's an example of one of those fluency scores and goals. So what you can do with this is an example of one of those CVNs. You're going to measure little Oliver that's in kindergarten. We're going to measure him on letter sounds. So he's been in RTI intervention, not in Tier 1, so he could be in Tier 2 or Tier 3. Most likely to look at this, he's in Tier 3. And what we're going to do is we're going to monitor. We have goals set for him. Where should he be? What's his goal? Where do we want him? And what's his fluency skill? So when we're in kindergarten, fluency is not words per minute. Fluency is going to be probably how many letter sounds he can say in a short amount of time, right? So you can see, whenever you're progress monitoring, you always have a goal here, right? You have a benchmark. The benchmarks where students should be based on their peers around them and their grade level. So the benchmark's where we want them to be. Then you have, okay, here's where all the peers are. This is where you should be with your peers. But here's our aim line. So this is just my goal. I know we're not going to get here yet, but here's my aim line. This is how you should progress based on where you are. Then we look at the actual place the student is. So as you'll see, right, coming into September 1st, okay, I know a lot of us start in August, but realistically, we're probably not going to get the student intervention until September 1st, if we're being honest. And then you have to go through all the weeks until you get, till the end. And what they normally do, at least they did this in my district, is that we would have books until December, and then we'd get a new book in the spring, okay? But this seems like for this, they kept it all the way through the whole school year. But what you're going to do is you're going to kind of progress how many little letter sounds little Oliver can get within a minute, right? Or with however many seconds you set. Okay, so we can see how little Oliver is progressing. And a lot of times they'll do good, bam, dropped. This is normal. We call this the December slump, right? Everyone's excited about Christmas. There's all these activities going on. They get distracted. They fall a lot of times. But we want to see progression moving toward our aim line. Based on the look of this, something is clicking after we come back from Christmas. They apparently are just getting it now. So they're starting to move up toward that aim line. If they continue, they may even meet that benchmark line, which is exciting. So as you'll see, I want to point out, the benchmark line and the aim line are set, so they will tier together and move into one component, right? So the lines will meet at this time in the year. So he's meeting and he's on progression. So what's going to happen based on this, he probably can move to Tier 2. Okay, so Tier 3 is the lowest and you're moving up the model. So let's go back here so you can see. You want to move up here with everyone else, right? That's where this visual is. So here he is. We probably can move him up to Tier 2 and then continue monitoring him. And before long, I think he's going to be right up here. She may have even already done this. So he might at this point been in tier 3. Then she's like, wow, in January he's doing good. So maybe here we might put him in tier 2. Oh, and this is him in tier 2. So these are things, and one thing I want to note is that throughout the tiers, you want them to move from 3 to 2 or 2 to 1. You don't want to move them down, but sometimes students move from tier 1 to tier 2 after Christmas as the content gets harder, because remember, they're lacking in some kind of deficit or skill here. So the next step is you're monitoring them. They're not doing very good. So let's say Oliver wasn't making any leeway, and he's stuck here the entire time, all the way over. At this point, we've tried the research-based strategies and intervention, and it's not working. So at this point, we would refer Oliver, right? So you can initiate the referral. A school personnel like administrator, or even a special ed teacher can refer. You can initiate the referral, or parent can, or any caregiver can do that. Okay, so when you fill out the form, it's kind of hard to see. Let me maximize it for you. So as you'll see here, inside of the referral, this is what an example form would look like. So you put the student's information, the date that you referred them, their birth date, their grade, their school, their address. Then you would put your signature because you're referring them. Then you would put the interventions you tried. So this would be the RTI strategies or anything you've tried with little Oliver that's not working. Then you're going to put the 3 referrals that your specific concerns for referral. Then you're going to put any kind of other assessments they've had. So did they have vision, hearing, and screening? So one thing I want to note, little Oliver's in kindergarten. Kindergarten, 2nd grade, they always do vision and hearing screening. So at this point, with little Oliver, you probably are going to have something here of when he had his vision and hearing screening. Here would be any other health-related information that would be relevant, sort of as a disability he may have, or hearing impairment, speech, anything of that sort goes here. Did the child go to preschool? Yes or no? Then you're going to put how many days absent the child was. The reason they ask this, there is correlation between absences of missing school and being present in school, and how you can have deficits because you're not there to get the material you learn. So this is important. You're going to also put if they're receiving any current services. So this usually happens. So little Oliver is our example that we're talking about. Little Oliver could be a kindergartner, but he could have already been in a preschool before. And if he's in a preschool before and he has a disability and he received an IFSP, he might have been receiving speech in preschool. We don't know, in Head Start. So these are things that you would list if he's getting speech, if he's getting guidance counselor, if he's got language because it's an ELL teacher, right? These are things we have to look at. Then you're going to attach any kind of records that you will have for Oliver. So this could be any kind of discipline records, any observations you've had written down, any kind of assessment scores. So of course, say that district test that we talked about, the DIBELS, that would be something that would be attached as well, because that was a district statewide assessment. Remember, that's one of our first steps in the referral process. And then you have the actual referral process beginning. So one thing to note, this would be an example of a student who is in an older grade, say 5th grade, and you're referring them for special ed evaluation. Their TCAP, which is a state exam, that information would be attached. So that's why that's there, to show you an example. So the process will be put through. They will determine if the child is going to receive services. Okay, so you have, the law states that it has to be completed within what they're going to do next. Let's back up. Once they do their referral, the assessments will start, right? So they're going to evaluate the child. So the child will get pulled out, they'll do assessments, they will send a form home, like an observation form. They'll send a questionnaire home with the parent, asking them questions about the child. that can be included. They have 60 days to get the assessment and evaluations done from the date of the referral. Now the next step is eligibility evaluation. So this is what is called a formal evaluation. So this is actually done under IDA. So they have non-discriminatory guidelines. So the documentation has to include, the following. So this would be intelligence, achievement, behavior, medical evaluations, disability-specific evaluations. And the evaluations have to be conducted by the team. Okay, so this would be what we were talking earlier when I was referring to the IEP team. So these individuals in this team will be general education teachers, so that would be you, or if you're a special ed teacher, that would be you. It could be educational diagnosticians, parents, medical service providers, professional guidance counselors. It could be medical professionals. So any of those people can make up the individuals on that team. So when we're evaluating, we really have to consider the differences of language, right? So we have to be culturally sensitive. So if you have a student that English is not their first language, this is something that we have to consider, because all assessments or things that's sent home to the parent has to be in that child's native language. So we have to think about this when we have that mode of communication from home to school, or from school to home. The last step is the eligibility. So if the child, has a disability that falls under IDEA, which we talked about last week, those 14 categories, they did add an additional category, developmental delay, plus those 13 make up the 14. We also have to look at what state you're in. The Tennessee State Department of Education recognizes 16 disability categories. So if the student has fallen under one of those disability categories, and we deem that this student disability has negatively impacted or adversely impacted that child's educational performance, then we can move forward and the student can receive special education services. So here's an example of the IEP process flowchart. Okay, we recognize we did the pre-referral, we have intervention stops that we've done, the evaluation, eligibility. Okay, so if you look here on this flowchart, what I want to point out to you, if we recognize there's something going on, we went through the steps of the RTI, pre-referral, that falls under RTI, and if we find that RTI is helping and that intervention, those intervention strategies are helping that child, then there's no need to move forward with the process. So we don't need to test them for special ed. But if we're doing these interventions and say little Oliver's not making any leadway, then we're going to move forward with the referral process, right? So we're going to evaluate them. The parent, one thing I want to note, the parent has to consent to the child being evaluated. If the parent declines, you cannot move forward with the process. So if the parent consents and they want to move forward with the referral and evaluation process, that's where we'll end up here at this section. Then we're going to determine if the child's eligible. If the child isn't found that they're not eligible, the process stops. But keep in mind, that child still may be able to receive 504, Section 504. So this is going to be modifications or accommodations for that student. If we do determine that child is eligible, so that means that the child has a disability that falls under the IDA category, disability categories, and that the disability adversely impacts their special education, or their education, then we deem that child, we determine they can receive special education services. Okay? That is the process in which we determine eligibility. Okay, now I have the citations and responses here. Okay, so what you're going to do, if we're looking at our actual assignment, so let me go down to week 6. I have IRIS modules. I tell you all the time, IRIS modules are there as a study tool for you. This is an IRIS module I want you to complete. So this is not optional. You will need to do this. I have 2 note sheets here for you. It's broken up into 2 parts, but remember, they're basically the same thing. It's just one stops and then it starts again. But it's the same IRIS module. So this one's really going to talk about how do you develop high quality individualized education plans. So high quality IEPs, what does that look like? And then the second part is what's actually included in the IEP document. So we went over the evaluation eligibility PowerPoint, which was very important for you to see the process of how this starts and what the process is of getting the child to receive services or assessing the child and evaluating them. This part is really going over, okay, we determine the child's going to receive services. Now what do we do? How do we actually develop this IEP, this individual plan for the child? So this is really going to help us understand how we get an IEP, what it is, who's a part of it, what does it look like, what's included. These are things I want you to think about. So what you're going to be turning into me, I have provided you with 2 note sheets. I only want you to submit the second part of the note sheet here to Dropbox. Okay, and I even put that there for you. The first one you can just use as a study tool. I mean, you're going to use both of them ideally as a study tool, but you're only going to be turning in the second one, part 2. Okay, if you decide to do one of the optional RADs, which you can this week, I have the article here for you as well as the link to the discussion board. And it's going to go along with the RTI. So one thing I wanted to note, in your textbook, The Teacher's Guide to Special Education, I said you're going to be reading chapters out of that. I really want you to pay close attention. If you turn to page... Hold on just a second, I'm finding it. If you turn to page 68, okay, it's going to go along with your IRIS module. So on page 68 to 73, it's going to talk about those required components in the IEP. Now, I do want you to look at some IEPs. I have some example ones for you, or some samples for you to look at. You're going to find that under Module 1. So remember, anything that talks about our assignments or any resources can all be found under Module 1. So let me go back here and show you how to get to... Okay, so go back to Module 1, and you're going to click on Student Resources. So if you'll go down, you're going to see Training IEPs at the bottom. If you click on those, you're going to see some sample IEPs. These are used for training. These IEPs are going to give you some insight to what an IEP is, depending on not only disability, but grade level. I recommend that you look through this as you're going through the Nearpod presentation. The Nearpod presentation talks about, let's look at IEPs. So this is how you're going to find them. Have them ready when you're looking at your Nearpod presentation. So you're going to pick one of these that kind of stand out to you. I would go based on, not only the grade level you want to teach, but maybe a disability that you want to learn more about what it would look like on an IEP. Okay, so there's a variety of grade levels and there's a variety of disability categories for you to look through, but have one ready when you're doing the Nearpod presentation. Okay, so let's go back to week 6. So after you do the IRIS module and you turn in your note sheet to Dropbox, if you decide to do the RAD, it's there for you. There's always a rubric I give you for the discussion board for RADs. Always look at them, because this is an idea of what I expect you to turn in. I went ahead and put the link to quiz 1 That's the first thing we talked about as soon as I got on here. I said this week, quiz 1 opens up. So quiz 1 started today at 8 a.m. and it will close Sunday, March 5th at 11:59. So I went ahead and put the link here for you as well. I also put a Nearpod quiz review. This Nearpod quiz review is for week 6 IEP content. So please do not think that this is a review for quiz 1 because it's not. I emailed that out to you. You can also find that in module 2, week 5, if you want the study for the exam. This is specifically for week 6. Okay guys, that's all I have for you. I really hope you get a lot because this is an important week for you. These last couple of weeks have really been important for you, not only with parent engagement and collaboration. Then we talked about the different disability categories, but now we're looking at IEPs. And we're looking at the process when we're talking about referring a student for special education. These are important things for us to know as educators. So please reach out if you have any questions. Please look at the Nearpod presentation and read from the textbook. That's going to help you as well as the IRIS module. I will be testing you over IEP, so the IRIS module is a wonderful study tool because you're going to learn a lot. But the Nearpod presentation goes over a lot of the IEP, so it's wonderful because it asks you quiz questions. And I also encourage you to look at the IEP team process video. If you are more of a read-write, you can just skip the video and go to the transcript, right? Because that's the same thing, you just don't have the visual. And then you can look at the Nearpod quiz review. I always encourage students that gives you feedback. You get to see how you're doing because we do not have quizzes in this course. We only have exams. So it's important for you to do these quiz reviews because they're going to give you a chance to test your knowledge on the content. All right, that's all I have for you. Do not forget that you have quiz 1 this week. So please make sure that you do that and take it. But don't take it until you're ready and you've studied for it. I'm available if you have any questions. I just wanted to remind you, I will be sending a separate video out about spring break because I've had some questions about that because spring break starts next week. So I will probably email you a video about that later this week. All right, guys, I hope you have a great week. Take care, and if you need anything, just let me know. Bye-bye.